Thank you, Marta, for the housekeeping notes. And thank you all for joining us today. My name is Virginia Palacios. I'm the Executive Director of Commission Shift based in Laredo, Texas. As many of you know, we are a statewide, nonpartisan nonprofit focused on reforming oil and gas oversight in Texas through accountability at the Railroad Commission. And so we're here today. I want to give some broader context of what's going on in the state and why this rulemaking on waste pits is happening. First of all, our goal is to leave this presentation ensuring that you feel informed about what you can do to be civically engaged and how you can protect yourself and your family from any facilities that are managing oil and gas waste near your home. The Railroad Commission, let's see, I see that my internet connection is unstable. Can y'all still hear me? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, the Railroad Commission has been updating these rules that are supposed to be for water protection. They apply mostly to oil and gas waste pits that take kind of like solid and liquids. They can be drill cuttings. Sometimes it's salt water that comes up with oil and gas production. And so these waste pits, the rules that govern these waste pits are intended to protect groundwater. And they've been updating these rules at the request of oil and gas waste pit companies that profit from managing that waste. And they've been having closed door meetings with these companies for the better part of 2 years without inviting any members of the public. In prior decades, when they looked at rewriting rules, they held meetings all over the state to engage the public and potentially impacted community members in rewriting the rules, but they have not done that this time, even though we have asked for it repeatedly. And so it is important for everyone here who maybe lives next to a waste pit or who lives in an oil and gas production area and might live next to one of these facilities in the future to get involved in this rulemaking, make comments, ask questions, and show our state agency that is governing this industry that you care and that you're paying attention and that you want to protect yourself and your family. The broader context is that for about the past 10 or 15 years, new technologies have come into play with oil and gas development that have created a lot more wastewater from oil and gas production. That wastewater has high levels of salt in it, but it can also come with all kinds of other potential contaminants like radionuclides, BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. These are chemicals that can cause cancer and other organ problems, and a whole host of other mystery chemicals that operators put downhole that we don't really have access to a lot of information about. And so we have to be really careful about what happens when these potential contaminants end up near our homes and near our water supplies. Certain legislators, Senator Perry has spearheaded a movement to treat produced water for reuse. Railroad Commissioner Jim Wright and others in the oil and gas waste industry are also interested in treating oil and gas waste liquids and solids so that they can sell the usable products from those waste streams. If produced water is not reused, it can also be spread over soil in a process called land farming. This is a process that has not been done on a widespread commercial basis throughout the state of Texas yet, but because of these rules, it might be seen in many more places throughout Texas. And so this rulemaking is really important for this new method of disposing of waste. Another proposal that we're seeing in these rule amendments is the potential for companies to use oil and gas waste solids as a road base on county roads. The Texas Department of Transportation has discouraged this because of the contaminants involved, but here we see the Railroad Commission is creating a pathway for that. And so again, these new changes can make it easier for companies to place contaminants near sensitive populations and in places where these materials simply shouldn't be. And that can make people sick. And so that's why we're here today. We're concerned about that potential. And we want to make sure that the public has a say in what goes into the rules and that we have real leverage to protect ourselves to prevent and correct public health harms. And so I think, you know, I think it's important for us to all remember that we are the government, all of us coming together, and when we participate in these processes as a unified community, we can get the changes that we need. And so tonight we have Claire Krebs, who will give us an overview of the rule and all of the distinct components of it. Following her presentation, we'll have time for a moderated Q&A session, and then we'll wrap up tonight's call with an off-the-record Q&A session. So if you are feeling a little bit more shy about being on a recording, you can wait until the very end, and we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for some off-the-record questions. Why don't we get started with some introductions? Kathy, would you please introduce yourself first?
Good evening. My name is Kathy Martin. I'm actually located in Norman, Oklahoma. I have an education that includes a degree in petroleum engineering and a master's in civil. I've worked with communities all over the country on a variety of environmental issues, and thus am familiar with how to interact with state agencies and also the frustration of trying to get something done. So I've been working with Commission Shift and Claire on providing some insight on the technical backgrounds or the technical aspects of the rule, especially like on liners and how waste interacts with groundwater. Anyway, hopefully you'll have some great questions I can address at the end.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. And I'll pass it to Claire to introduce herself and continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Virginia. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, make sure that's working. And yeah, my name is Claire Krebs. I'm located in Austin, Texas, and I'm an environmental attorney as well as a professional engineer. So I've done some of the groundwater sampling work, not at waste pit sites, but at other industrial sites throughout Texas, and then have some experience with oil and gas in general, and have spent a lot of time looking at these new rules. So let's go ahead and dive right in. First off, in the spirit of translation, if you would like a translation of these slides into Spanish, let us know either in the chat or afterwards, and we'll get them translated for you. This is something that the language access is something that the Commission Shift has been trying to push at the Railroad Commission, and the Railroad Commission does have one Spanish synopsis of these rules. The link is here. And there's actually going to be a lot of links throughout this presentation with the idea that we'll share these slides with you. And you'll be able to click through and see our comments, see the different proposed rules, and let this kind of be a working document that you could use when you have discussions with staff or representatives or communities. So the intent for this webinar is to share information and then spark some discussion. So I've broken it into 3 parts. First, I'm going to overview the 2 major oil and gas waste rulemakings that are happening for folks who may not be as familiar with this topic. And then second, I'm going to drill down into some of Commission Shift's top concerns, highlighting topics that we've put into our comments and that communities are raising. And there may be topics there that you might also want to consider taking to the commission as well and putting forward. And then third is where we're going to talk about a few advocacy steps and really get into the discussion. So first, overviewing the rulemaking. These are changes to Title 16 of the Texas Administrative Code, Part 1, Chapters 3 and 4. So here's a link that you'll be able to use later for that. And this is actually looks like kind of 2 rulemakings because there are 2 subchapters at issue. The first is Subchapter A, and that is where what is currently statewide Rule 8 and which is currently living in Chapter 3 is going to move into Chapter 4 and become this new Subchapter A. And this rulemaking is about waste pits mostly, but like Virginia said, there's other things inside there about land spreading, about surface water protection, basically issues related to waste management. And it is based on this original Rule 3.8 or statewide Rule 8, which is from the 80s and hasn't been updated since. There was a failed attempt at updating this rule in 2002, and a lot of the changes in the rule look similar to what we see here now. But I basically think of this as like the Waste Pit Plus rule. It's about 86 pages, so a lot of material and much more than what the current Rule 8 looks like. Now, the second rulemaking is updates to Subchapter B, which is the current rules on commercial recycling. Those are being tweaked. And this is where the new division about using drill cuttings on county roads that Virginia mentioned is going to live. And this rulemaking is 74 pages, but it's actually Subchapter 4B is bigger than that. And it was last revised in 2012. And I think when we think about advocacy on these rules, it's good to keep in mind that some of the changes that are being made to these rules are because there's a statute, like a law got passed that specifically tells the Railroad Commission they must do X, Y, and Z. But then in other areas, the Railroad Commission has a lot more discretion in which to incorporate the feedback of communities or industry. And so there's more leeway for advocacy there. And with our comments, we have tried to indicate that in the different sections, but keep that in mind as we work through this advocacy wise. So Virginia already kind of overviewed that as for the history of this rulemaking, it's mostly been industry and lobbyists and the like who have gotten to look at these drafts already. The public was not invited to participate until the informal comment period opened in October, which of course is an opportunity for industry and operators and associations to comment as well. Just to be clear, this sort of rulemaking practice is exclusionary. This is not a stakeholder process when you exclude stakeholders from the get-go, from the initial drafting of this. And it is something that Commission Shift is fighting to make better. But it is kind of where we are now, which is the Railroad Commission is reviewing the informal comments that were submitted. So ours, yours, industries. And they are figuring out how to change the draft language. And this is an opportunity for, just because the comment period has closed, people are talking to the Railroad Commission about changes that should be made. So we should as well. Once they go through that process, which may take several months, in earlier 2024, potentially the spring, the Railroad Commission will have landed on a draft rule that they will then publish for formal comment. And there will have to be at least one meeting. We're going to push for many more. And the comment period may be 30 days. And yet again, we'll review the rules, submit comments, and then the commission will have one more opportunity to incorporate those before they publish the rule, before they finally publish the rule, and that will have a response to comments as well. So despite kind of being shut out of the beginning of the process, which is very problematic, we are still in the middle and there's still time and there's lots to do to push for better rules. So to finish up kind of overviewing these rules for folks who may be newer to this issue, I want to make sure we have a grasp of what's in Subchapter A and what's in Subchapter B. So Subchapter A, which is again where statewide Rule 8 is being moved, a lot of it regulates the earthen or lined pits that hold the oil and gas waste that's generated during the exploration and production process. So drilling muds, wastewater, etc. And some of these pits, pits that are located generally at the well pad that are smaller, don't actually need permits from the Railroad Commission. They are what is known as authorized pits. which means as long as they follow the rules that are going to be in Division 3 of Subchapter A. As long as they follow those rules, the operator doesn't need to get a paper permit. It doesn't need to comply with notice. It doesn't need to tell the folks that are living around there. It can simply build, use, and close the pit with less oversight. And so these authorized pits are typically at the drilling location. They're supposed to be smaller. They're supposed to be temporary. And then there's also a category of pits that if they're not authorized by the rule, or if it's a larger facility that's taking in waste from different operations, that then processes it, that sort of operation is going to need a paper permit. So like a commercial landfill would need one. And those rules are in Divisions 4 and 8 of Subchapter A of the waste pit rules. And then there's the plus side of the waste pit plus Subchapter A rule, which is all these other types of related operations, such as non-commercial fluid recycling, land farming, reclamation plants, rules on hauling waste, and then surface water protection. So that's generally what's encompassed in Subchapter A. But let's look at a couple images. The one I have on the slide right here now is actually a portion of a permitted site that processes waste. So they had to get a permit, and they had a actually unauthorized pit, kind of in the sandy portion, and a railroad commission personnel went out there to observe, and they saw that there was a leak from that unauthorized pit that traveled over 300 feet into the woods, leaking super saline water that should not have happened. And so here's just one image of a site, and it actually happens to be one that has problems with it, and that should have gotten permitted. Now, this next image is actually pulled from some industry comments, and this is to kind of give you an idea of what pits might fall under the authorized section, so wouldn't need notice. And these, I've got a bunch of little arrows pointing to what used to be reserve pits next to weld pads. And reserve pits are where you would hold drilling mud and other water fluid solids that would come up out of the well bore. And you can kind of see there's basically a pit at every well pad. And these sorts of facilities, or these sorts of, pits would go through the Division 3 process. And if we zoom in a little bit more, again, these images are actually from industry comments. These are closer images of these reserve pits, things that would not need permits. And on the left, you can see some white chloride salt staining, which shouldn't be there. And on the right, at the lower bottom part of that pit, there's some drill cuttings that are spilling out of the pit. Regardless, these are the sort of things that wouldn't be permitted under the rule. And then the last image I wanted to show you, we've taken a satellite view of one of the larger commercial disposal facilities. This one would need a permit. It has multiple pits, and you can actually see it's really close to houses. This comes from Commission Ship's waste pit map, which is on our website, and where you can toggle on and off a bunch of layers that show water wells, where we expect residences to kind of get a visceral idea of like, okay, what are these facilities look like? And I'll just highlight here that we've toggled on the 500-foot buffer around the facility. 500 feet is kind of the maximum distance where someone who's trying to permit a facility needs to give people notice. So if you're in that 500-foot strip, then you would have gotten a notice letter that this facility was coming to your neighborhood. But if you lived outside of it, as it looks like there's a lot of people here who do, you wouldn't have gotten notice, even though you're probably going to know that there's a pit and feel impacts beyond that 500-foot distance. So that's A. B is commercial recycling, like I said. So the first 6 divisions are facilities that would recycle solid or liquid waste. And they permit them based on how long they expect those facilities to be in operation. Kind of minor changes here, but that really the one I want everybody to walk away knowing about is Division 7, which is totally new and is allowing treated drill cuttings to go on roads and building materials. And we'll talk about that very shortly. So I want to drive the second part of this. I want to drill down into some of the topics, and we may move quickly through some of them, but we can come back during discussion to ones that you guys want to talk about. I'll say here again, I've got links to our comments in our exhibits, and you'll see the links to them on each slide as we go forward, where you can go and see what page we've talked about it, and you can see what page the draft rules are. You can see that at the bottom left of this slide now. So drill cuttings, treated drill cuttings on roads. This was one of the most concerning parts of the rule to me. It was in the last 3 pages of our 150-page rulemaking. So I think it escaped some folks noticed that might wanted to look at it. And this division basically authorizes the use of treated, recycled drill cuttings in applications that aren't like limited to a waste pit. So it's not about burying it, or it's not about using it on a specific identified site. It would allow these drill cuttings to be used in a ton of applications. And 3 specific categories of applications. And here's an example of where it's good to know what the Railroad Commission has been told to do by statute versus where they're maybe reaching a little too far, because the statute directs the Railroad Commission to make rules about using drill cuttings on oil and gas lease roads. That's like the first use. But the next 2 uses the statute doesn't talk about. And those are concerning because one of them is spreading this waste on county roads, which are 47% of the roads in the state. And the other use is this laundry list of activities that you see on the side that includes using it for construction fill, using it for burn material, concrete bulking agent, backfill material. And if you look at those, that's a lot of applications. And then when you look at the division itself, there aren't a lot of restrictions on making sure that this material doesn't end up next to homes, playgrounds, schools, etc. And what is also concerning here is that it is largely a copy-paste proposal that was made about 4 years ago that failed to pass into actual rule. It is also a copy paste in many places from other parts of the commercial recycling rules without sufficient consideration for these potential increased risks of now allowing this material in a lot of applications. In my opinion, it should not be part of this rulemaking. It's not ready for it, and it's something that we need to really elevate. The second and last thing I want to say about subchapter B before we go to A is division 5 and 6. Now I'm talking about a totally different topic. Includes this presumption now about where it's safe to put certain types of commercial recycling facilities. And so I've put a snippet of the draft language up here. It's underlined. And it basically says, it basically ties the Railroad Commission's hands and tells them, you must presume that if you meet all the siting criteria in this division, that there's not going to be an unreasonable risk to health or safety unless somebody can show that there are extraordinary circumstances otherwise. Now, this is a super high bar that doesn't show up in any other rules that I've seen. And it's unfair to communities to make them surmount such a bar of undefined extraordinary circumstances in order to push back and say, hey, actually, there is some evidence that this facility shouldn't be built near us. So we are pushing the Railroad Commission to absolutely get rid of this language. It's not a statutory requirement. Okay, another topic. As we transition from subchapter B to subchapter A, one of the things that in our comments that we want folks to look at and elevate is the fact that both of these subchapters have a lot of rules, but they also have exceptions to the rules. And I've highlighted the exception language from subchapter A, and it would allow an applicant or a permittee to request an exception for almost any of the rules in the chapter by submitting a written request. And so you could get an exception. You can't get exceptions to some of the financial rules, the rules on notice and sampling analysis, but you could imagine requesting an exception on setbacks, construction standards, monitoring, and things like that. And these are exceptions. The way it's written, it doesn't limit, it's not just permitted projects that can ask for an exception that are going through a public review process anyway. It's authorized pits. Those are the ones that, don't have the paper permit. They just have to meet the rules. So one of the concerns here that we're elevating is the public should be involved and know and be able to comment and give feedback when an exception is requested. And the other thing in this language here that is concerning is that it bakes in some grandfathering for facilities that were existing before these rules get passed, that don't necessarily take into consideration whether it's appropriate for the protection of public health, safety, and the environment. So here is a section we're pushing back on. Next, let's talk about definitions. And I should say, pause and just say, I know there's a lot of things that need to be fixed in the rules, and I do encourage you to go through our comments and pick through some of these issues. So I'm just highlighting some of them for you. The rules having strong rules requires having good definitions. And so we spent some time going through the definition section to try to make sure that the definitions aligned with what we would expect them to and didn't create loopholes in themselves. And that's where we came to this definition of commercial facility. Because as I've kind of alluded, there are pits that are authorized that have some requirements, and then there's pits that are permitted that have higher, maybe stricter regulations, and then there's another level of commercial activities that should be regulated at a higher standard. So it's critical to have a good commercial facility definition. And at the beginning of the process, the Railroad Commission did have a common sense definition of commercial, which was a facility whose owner receives compensation from others for the management of oil and gas waste. And that doesn't perfectly encompass the fact that you would expect a commercial facility to have more waste, store it for a longer duration, and maybe be more risky, but it incorporates the idea of, this is a business operation. We should regulate it probably more strictly. However, during the drafting process with industry and operator and lobbyist pressure, this definition has been twisted. So there are a number of loopholes in it. For example, you're only commercial if it's your primary business purpose to provide management services for compensation. You're only commercial if you're accepting waste by truck, not any other means. And you're not necessarily commercial as long as the entities that you are serving are sufficiently related to you. And this seems to be bending around and trying to accommodate some interests. We believe it to be some of the non-commercial fluid recycling operators in facilities that don't want to meet some of the more strict regulations that they'd have to if they were commercial. But we don't think it's not the place to do it in this definition, and it's not transparent. And so we support a more common sense definition here. Likewise, I'd encourage all to look at the non-commercial fluid recycling definition, which is a defined term and has a lot of problems with it, in that it's not clear who's encompassed by it. Another topic, I think one communities are very familiar with is that notice needs work. When you look at this rule, this proposal compared to the previous rule, there's not been a lot of updates and changes and improvements on notice, like who gets noticed when a facility might be built in your backyard. So we are pushing for a number of changes. The first being related to who gets notice. Right now, only people within 500 feet of the property boundary, and in the best scenario, if you're a commercial facility, would get mailed notice that a facility might be built in your backyard. Instead, we strongly are urging that notice be sent to everyone within at least 1 mile. There's 2 reasons. First, people feel effects within this distance. What I've got on the screen right now is a snapshot of a waste pit that's located next to the town of Nordheim. And you can see there's a number of homes that are within 1 mile, but outside of the 500-foot notice radius that they, and those folks in Nordheim and community members have experienced impacts from facilities well within this radius and actually beyond. And so that's one reason to put it at 1 mile. The other reason that you can cite is the fact that operators are required to identify the water wells that are within 1 mile of the facility when they file an application for a permit with the Railroad Commission. But the water well databases are not well updated, and one of the better ways to get information on where water wells are is to actually talk to and let the folks who are within 1 mile know that there is a facility coming and that there might be that they would need to disclose water wells. And this is also important because whether or not a facility is required to install a groundwater well also depends on whether there are wells within that 1 mile radius that do have water at a sufficient depth. And so we're also pushing for online posting of the notices. This is something that TCEQ already does for all of the permit applications that they receive. The Railroad Commission should do this as well. A subscription notice list. There's one for carbon sequestration projects that the Railroad Commission is going to have to manage. And that would be a place where you could provide your information and ask to be notified whenever there's a project within your county. And this is already something that TCEQ and Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality do as well. We're pushing for better multilingual notices. And then after the notice issue, one of the problems that communities have is that often they only get 15 days in which to protest, which is not sufficient. So we're pushing for that to be at least 30 days, which would mirror the amount of time that industry or an applicant has to respond to a protest letter. And so we're pushing for that, but I know that does not fix a lot of the administrative problems that communities report having when they go actually to protest facilities. That they're the ones shouldering the burden for proving that that a facility is unsafe, as opposed to having it rest on the shoulders of the applicant. That even if an examiner perhaps denies an application, it can get revived by commissioners. There are all of these compounding administrative problems, including questions about air impacts, which we haven't really talked about much yet, but are some of the impacts that people are feeling. And my response to that is that there's some areas in this rule where we can push for stronger language, for example, for the Railroad Commission to work with the TCEQ and respond better to air quality complaints, or at least not issue permits if there's pending air quality problems with TCEQ. And so, but this is the extent of the language currently in the proposal that would do that. And so in some respects, it may be the fact that we need to continue raising these air issues, raising these administrative permitting process issues, but that because this rulemaking is really limited to waste pits and some of those air issues and the administrative issues are in different rules, those may have to be addressed later on. That's not saying not to raise those issues now. Push on this sort of these sorts of problems, because they are real, and communities are some of the, these are some of the biggest problems communities are having. But we've got to tackle what can be done in this one. So all that to say, let's make sure that we participate in this rulemaking on what we can do here, and know that some issues we may have to keep fighting on. So back to specifically this waste pit rulemaking. The draft still has subpar setbacks. So for authorized pits and permitted facilities, there are some default setbacks in the rules, but the maximum setback is 1,000 feet, and impacts happen beyond 1,000 feet. And here is an area where I want to make sure folks are aware of the Stronger group, because Stronger is an organization of regulators in industry and environmental groups, and they look at a 50-state survey of oil and gas rules that states are putting, that states have and have put together guidelines for what the bare minimum and best practices are when states go to write their own rules. And so we've cited Stronger in a number of places throughout the comments. And this is actually one place where they have good recommendations, and the same recommendations we're saying, which is the setbacks need to not just be from residences or wells, they should be from schools, hospitals, and commercial buildings. And setbacks should be from the property boundary of a facility, not a pit. So you can take a look at that as well. And so I just want to show here in A and then in B, the language for setbacks. And one of the concerning things is, again, is the exceptions, that exceptions can be made to these. So really these should be stronger setbacks if you can get an exception to them. And one of the problems is that the setback from surface water is only 300 feet, yet at the beginning of the presentation, we were looking at one of these facilities that was spilling saline water beyond 300 feet. So that doesn't seem sufficient here. Same thing in subchapter B that applies to commercial recycling facilities. It's got that 300 feet setback. Here, it does incorporate a setback from schools, hospitals, institutions, and churches. But I'll say there's other receptors that can be that we should probably protect, and that TCEQ does protect, such as daycares. So really elevating this issue is something we're trying to do as well. Let's see, I've got a couple more topics. One thing we're pushing for is better. Yes, Virginia.
You have 2 minutes left, Claire, on the presentation.
Okay. then I will fly like the wind. So we're trying to push for better applications as well. We think the Railroad Commission should include a community relations plan as part of their application requirement for all permitted facilities. That they should, as part of their permits, include site-specific enforcement checklists for their inspectors. That's something that community groups have been able to get the commission to agree to in order to follow up on bad actors, but the current enforcement checklist is like bare bones minimum and doesn't help the inspector actually make sure that the permits are being followed. We're pushing for surface owner consent before an authorized pit can be built. Also, there are construction quality control documents that like liner installers just have that we believe should be sent to the Railroad Commission to ensure that these pits are being built the way they should. Pushing for as-built photographs and better inspections and pushing on those sorts of details. There's a lot that can also be done for groundwater protection. The previous rules, actually the commission proposed more stringent groundwater monitoring and more wells in more circumstances, and this current draft just kind of undercut that. So we don't want to get it undercut further, but there's improvements on sampling that should be done, how you actually measure cleanup, and also how you go about finding groundwater. Another topic is that we really want to support is the Railroad Commission is actually doing something good to try to get all authorized pits registered. Those were not registered in the past, so no one was tracking them. And so we do want to really help the commission get this incorporated into the rule, but we would like to have them agree to a deadline by which a registration system is set in place. And then the last couple of things is there is Division 9 has a bunch of miscellaneous permit programs, which are again kind of these loopholes for the Railroad Commission to create additional permitting programs, but without the notice and comment rulemaking process that we're going through right now. And they've actually released some guidelines that would fall into one of those pilot programs, which I've got here on the slide. It's about produced water recycling. And we haven't gotten a chance to really go fully deep into that. We've also pushing for stricter penalties and suggesting that the penalty values be increased. These are potentially the values that they would use, and we can talk about that if people have questions. But yeah, and we're also pushing on public participation just in general in the rulemaking. And so now I just want to, the last thing I will say is that advocacy steps forward. We've got a couple of suggestions here. There's a January 30th Railroad Commission open meeting happening soon, and you can sign up for open comment or public comment, excuse me, and raise some of these issues. And we encourage you to, even though there's not a comment period, reach out to your legislators, reach out to Railroad Commission staff to elevate these issues. Please keep talking to media, and then comment and share and build a community of folks who are working on this, because folks have different angles of approaching this. We encourage you to read the draft, review comments, both ours, communities, and industry. And reminder that March primaries are coming up, and legislators and commissioners are elected officials, and they should be responsive to the public. So, apologies for running long. My contact information is here. Also, Railroad Commission staff contact information, and I will open it back up, Virginia, or
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. And we know that it's a lot of information and a lot of new topics and subject areas. So we just want to encourage folks to kind of ask any clarifying questions in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and start our moderated discussion right now. This part is on the record. If, you know, as soon as we're done with any like key questions, or if people don't have any questions, we'll go off the record, and then, you know, we'll have a little more privacy. And so let's see, are there any questions that folks want to throw in the chat or just say out loud? I'll just wait.
Virginia, it might be interesting to talk about the next steps of the rulemaking as well, that there's.
Yeah, I think we had a slide on that if you want to navigate back to that, Claire. Essentially, as Claire mentioned, we're in the informal period right now, right? There has already been a comment deadline for that informal draft that was released, which is what these comments are based on. And so we are expecting that sometime in mid-spring, the Railroad Commission is going to release their formal draft amendments. And when they do that, there will be at least 30 days for the public to comment. Usually when they release these drafts, they release them about 2 weeks early, so you get around 45 days to comment. But it is a short amount of time to look through many, many pages of changes. And so another thing we can do, you know, as a group, is ask for an extended formal comment period so that people can have a meaningful amount of time to look at these documents and decide how they feel about them and make suggestions. But anytime now and before they release that formal draft, you can schedule a meeting with Railroad Commission staff or the Railroad Commissioners themselves and let them know what you think. You can also send them a letter with comments, just letting them know, like, these are the most important things to me. And so you don't necessarily have to wait until that formal comment period starts. One advantage to commenting during the formal comment period is that they have to respond to your questions and your comments that you bring up during the formal comment period. So they will put answers in writing when you comment during that period. So we made a lot of comments during the informal comment period. They don't necessarily have to respond to us in writing for those comments, but you know, they will during the formal comment period. So that can be helpful too. Claire, since we're not getting any immediate questions in the chat, do you want to go over the penalty structure a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. Happy to. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Yeah. So penalties. So there was not a penalties section in Chapter 4 originally, and so what the Railroad Commission has done is copied and pasted from Rule 107 that's in Chapter 3 and placed it in here. And one of the things that I think the Railroad Commission would be receptive to is if we wanted to make that penalty language stronger, they would need to know how they can do that while remaining consistent with their other penalty schemes that they use for other violations. And so we've made recommendations on how that language can be stronger and suggest that the Railroad Commission respond more promptly to citizen complaints and act more, I guess, aggressively against bad actors. But one area to do some changes that maybe we can have some leverage on is the actual value of those penalties. And so those dollar amounts were not disclosed in the proposed rulemaking, but they were, because they copy pasted from Chapter 3. Chapter 3 appears to would be where I would expect them to start off with the penalties. So there's 4 tables here, and these are the penalties that are for different violations of the current statewide Rule 8, and you can see they're fairly minimal. Pollution of surface or subsurface water can be just $1,000. Improper disposal of oil and gas waste could be just $500 plus per square foot additive. And this you know, the Railroad Commission hardly ever gets to this penalty stage. So having stronger dollar values might actually help enforcement too, as a threat, that if you got to this stage, this is what it would be, because the Railroad Commission does negotiate downwards. So the next two slides were just the tables of the other enhanced penalty enhancements that are in chapter 3. So figuring out how this should be elevated is another avenue that should be pursued.
Thanks, Claire.
Yeah.
Let's see, I just wanted to answer a couple of notes that came up in the chat. So I just want to discuss the process for making a public comment at the Railroad Commission open meeting. The meeting is divided into a couple of different sections. The majority of the items, you can sign up to comment on an individual item. But if you sign up to comment on an item that is listed in the Railroad Commission agenda, they do not have to call on you during that agenda item in the meeting. And so they sort of see it as, well, if the administrative law judges already went through a hearings process, then that would have been the public's opportunity to comment on that issue. And by the time it gets to the open meeting, the railroad commissioners are basically just ready to approve. So they will only very occasionally call on people who are signed up for an agenda item if they have a question, but a lot of the times they don't take advantage of that opportunity. So if you want to give public input, it's one of the last items on the meeting agenda, and so you have to sign up during that section. And when you sign up in that section, they want you to comment on something that is not already in the Railroad Commission agenda. The exception to this is if the item is like this, a rulemaking, and the rulemaking is still open. Usually if you sign up during public input and this rulemaking, if it happens to be on the agenda, like because it's the first day that they've started the rulemaking, they'll take your comment on that rulemaking during the open meeting. So you can go ahead and comment on that. So to find out how to register for public input, I had dropped the link to the Railroad Commission meeting agendas page in the chat. I think SJ can drop it again, but you download the agenda, and in the first part of the agenda, it'll tell you who to email and what kind of information to send them. It's usually just basic stuff like name, title, phone number, address, and the agenda item you're commenting on. So in this case, it would be public input. And typically they give about 3 minutes for public input. Let's see. And we also have been doing a lot of sort of awareness raising around the open meeting. So SJ could also, I don't know if we have it ready yet, but usually we have an RSVP link. And so we can keep you on a little email list for the open meetings. If we don't have it ready yet for the January 30th meeting, you can just like send us your email and we'll make sure that you're on board with that. Okay, SJ is going to go get it. She's our comms manager. And let's see, the next question we have in the chat is from Don McCown. Is Railroad Commission staff willing to give feedback on commission shift comments, even though the formal comment period hasn't started? We have met with the Railroad Commission staff, Claire, Kathy, and I did. And so we're talking to them and having, conversation with them. We walked through most of our like more complex comments with them. And we have other meetings scheduled so that we can make sure that they understand everything that we've brought to them. And so we are having those conversations, nothing really in writing yet, though. Any other questions?
Did you just answer the question in the chat, Virginia? I'm multitasking and I just want to make sure.
Yes, the question about
that we submitted.
comments, yeah, Railroad Commission staff's comments. And so while SJ finds that RSVP link for the open meetings, the other thing that we usually do after the open meetings is a Twitter space. And so this is kind of like a live podcasting type of thing that you can get on Twitter, which is now called X. And so we'll kind of just gather together and reflect on what just happened in the meeting and kind of like break it down and explain more about what just happened. Any other questions? Okay. If there's no other questions, I think we can go ahead and go off the record, and then we'll see if anybody wants to talk about anything off the record. And SJ can go ahead and stop the